everybody described as a misanthrope. But I think he's somebody who didn't suffer fools gladly. I think he hated anything that was showy or gaudy. He dressed totally in black. He lived very, very privately, did all his own shopping, wouldn't allow anybody else to do it. He was tremendously well read. He studied all the time, indefatigable student of Jewish law. He was a Franco-Jewish family. He translated the whole of the Bible, Old and New Testament, from Syriac into French. He said at one time if he lived long enough he'd want to set the whole of the Bible to music. He was highly religious. People gave parties for him, towards the end of his life, and he would turn up. And before the main guests had arrived, the clock struck 10. He always left immediately, sort of Cinderella figure. I've often wondered what it would be like to meet him. I'm sure he would have been delightful to somebody he found was congenial, but difficult to get close to because he kept two flats. And if somebody happened to get into the lower flat, he simply escaped to the upper flat. And see, people always sent away by the concierge. He was given instruction that nobody's allowed in, only pupils who have a definite appointment. I didn't think he didn't want to have his rhythm of life interfered with. It was absolutely regulated.
I have a picture of him which is rather severe. I think he was a highly intellectual man, so one has to have this sort of rather austere image of him. And I think that you can hear that in the music. There's a great passion undoubtedly near the surface, but over the top of that there's laid a rather severe and cold facade. And the way that he shows this in the music is in a very rigid structure and worked out way of presenting the musical ideas. There was no show about him, but then there's a strange kind of paradox because later on in his life, after all these years of not appearing as a performer or even socially in the Paris musical scene, he chose to come out of retirement and present a series of concerts in Paris.
In his 60th year, he suddenly decided that he wants to make a comeback as a pianist. And he inaugurated what he called Six Petits Concerts.
And the programs which he chose to play on those occasions were gigantic and full of, it was an attempt to survey the complete history of piano music, from Rameau, who he admired very much, and Couperin, up to his own music. And that in a way seems to be more of a statement which is a little outside the general picture of someone who's quite happy to be on his own for vast stretches of his life.
Legend has always had it that he died under a falling bookcase. Isidore Philippe claimed to be one of the people who discovered him. They noticed that the curtains hadn't moved. Alkan had not been seen for a day or two. They were worried. They broke down the door. They went in and they found him horizontal with this upturned bookcase. He was trapped and, of course, dead. Now, there is an account by Alexander the Better, Hungarian pianist who met Alkan and with Isidore Philippe was one of the coffin bearers. He gives a totally different account. He said that he was found stretched out and lifeless beside his stove that he was about to light to cook his evening meal, which sounds very normal. He may have had a heart attack or something like this. So there we are. The whole thing is wrapped in mystery, but I think it's essential for the mystique of Alkan that he should have died under the bookcase, but not, as some people say, clutching the Talmud, the Hebrew book. But it is such a strange life and such a strange end. The obituary reads, Alkan has died. But most people say, who was Alkan? The French never really forgave him because he was their greatest hope as a national composer and pianist, and he didn't raise a finger to promote himself. So they allowed him to go into oblivion. Nobody took any notice of him until Isidore Philippe persuaded Busoni, and Busoni was absolutely taken with his music.
And it was Busoni, incidentally, who said that he thought Alkan was one of the very few great post-Beethoven piano composers, and that is including Chopin, Liszt, Schumann, and Brahms. The music has been let go out of print during the first part of this century, and the pianists who have had the courage to dig it up or find old copies or whatever were very rare. But there were people like Petri, Claudio Arrau, believe it or not, who were interested in his music. And in their early days, especially Arrau's, did try to propagate it.
And so it was not really until the era of LP gramophone records that the musical fraternity had any chance of knowing what this music was like. This was around about 69 or 70, so it's not so long ago, 25 years ago.
I think that the Opus 39 set of minor key studies is extraordinary work. Of course, it contains within the 12 pieces the 3 that make up the concerto and 4 movements which make up a symphony for solo piano. And leaving aside those 7 movements, the other 5 are on a gigantic scale.
The concerto for solo piano is probably his largest, certainly one of his greatest piano works. The first movement plays for about 28 minutes, so the first movement alone is as long as the whole of the Liszt sonata. And it goes through at one tempo from beginning to end. It's got colossal impetus. It starts, for the first 2 or 3 minutes, with an orchestral exposition, which of course is played by the pianist, but it's totally orchestral in conception. And there is little doubt to the listener when the solo part enters. Then there's a very expansive piano exposition in which obviously there are effects of piano and orchestra together, which of course the pianist has to get across. Then there's a huge development section. At the heart of this is one of the strangest passages in the whole of 19th century music, in which suddenly everything is stilled and frozen, and you get the rhythm of the opening. Yum-ba, dee yum-ba-ba-ba-ba, yum-ba, da-dum. Ba, da, da is repeated, bar after bar, hypnotically, and wisps of the second subject weave round it.
It's a coming together of several things. The psychology of the music is a thread which it's difficult to relate to other composers. There's a bitterness about it and an irony and at times grotesque nature which, well, Liszt sometimes got into this area, but not many of his contemporaries. So that is a difficult thing to project alongside the really enormous technical demands.
It will be apparent to the listeners that the difficulty in Alkan's music is of a very high virtuosic order, but there's also an element that you don't find too much in other music of that particular genre, and that is that there are certain athletic considerations, because one has, for such a piece, to conserve one's energies. Because there are several very huge climaxes in the first movement alone, and if one spends oneself right away, one will not have anything left for the rest. And I guess it's like tenors saving themselves for the high C, if you will. But there several high C's in this piece, and perhaps higher notes as well.
To play, it's an all-engulfing experience. One has to light a candle to one's favourite saint and then walk on. You just throw yourself into it. You have to concentrate very hard. You have to be very much on top of it. You have to have considerable staying power. I know the feeling of emerging at the end in the first movement of that enormous development section. There's the most thrilling lead back into the recapitulation. One of the most thrilling pianistic and musical experiences, I think, from the 19th century.
I love playing this music, and especially this piece. It's like reciting a poem in a way. A poem that has a beginning, a middle, and an ending. You start at the beginning and you see the end. And in between, there's all this wonderful journey.